I'll never forget the sound of laughter that night. It wasn't warm or joyful, the kind of laughter you expect on Christmas when a family is gathered around the table. No, this was sharper, like glass breaking, and the shards landed right in my chest. It happened when my daughter-in-law, with that smug smile she wears when she feels untouchable, pointed her manicured finger at me and said, "We only invited her out of pity." The table erupted. Her cousins chuckled. Her parents covered their smirks behind napkins. And even my son, my own flesh and blood, lowered his head and said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any insult. I sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the same way I've done for 72 years when storms brewed around me. I let the laughter wash over me like cold rain. And I didn't defend myself, not yet. Because while they thought they were humiliating an old woman, they had no idea the truth was about to walk through the very front door. But before I tell you what happened next, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Louise Harrington. I'm 72 years old, a widow, a mother, and though my family has long forgotten it, the woman who made this house a home. And before I take you into the fire of that Christmas dinner, I'd like to know something from you. Where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Because as you'll soon see, no matter where you live, betrayal sounds the same in every language. Now, let me take you back. The Harrington house looked perfect that evening, at least on the surface. A roaring fire crackled in the stone fireplace. A 12-oot Christmas tree sparkled with ornaments collected over generations, and the table was dressed like something from a magazine. Polished silverware, crystal glasses, plates rimmed with gold. It should have been a night of warmth, a night where my late husband's chair at the head of the table was remembered with quiet respect. Instead, his absence felt like an open door, one that let in coldness I hadn't known possible in my own family. My son Michael sat beside his wife, Caroline. Caroline, the kind of woman who always made sure her diamond bracelet caught the light when she reached for the gravy boat. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. But her beauty came with sharp edges, the kind that cut anyone who got too close. I had spent the morning preparing my special cranberry relish, a recipe my mother taught me. It sat untouched in a small glass bowl at the far end of the table, ignored in favor of Caroline's catered dishes. A silly detail maybe, but when you've poured your heart into something and it's dismissed without a word, it stings. Caroline's parents, George and Lorraine, were there too, sitting tall in their chairs, eyes flicking around the room like they were inspecting a piece of real estate. They never looked at me as family, just an add-on, a shadow. And then there were the cousins. Younger, full of wine and gossip, laughing too loudly at Caroline's jokes. That's when it came. That single line that shifted the night from uncomfortable to unforgettable. We only invited her out of pity. Her words didn't echo once. They bounced around the room, repeated in laughter, in smirks, in whispers. I saw Michael's eyes dart down to his plate, his fork scraping aimlessly across porcelain. He didn't defend me. He didn't even flinch. I wanted to cry. My throat tightened. My vision blurred at the edges. But 72 years teaches you something about pain. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is sit still and let people show you who they are. What none of them knew, what not even Michael understood, was that I had prepared for this night in more ways than one. Because I'd seen the looks, heard the whispers, felt the dismissal building for years. This Christmas dinner was simply the stage they'd chosen to make it official, and I had chosen mine too. The meal went on, awkward laughter filling the silence where kindness should have lived. Caroline raised her glass to toast family, while her words about pity still clung to the air. Every sip of wine burned my throat, not from the alcohol, but from the humiliation. Yet even as they laughed, I sat with an odd calmness. Not because their cruelty didn't wound me, it did, but because I knew something they didn't. That night, their cruelty would meet its mirror. That night, while they sat in my dining room on my chairs, eating beneath my roof, they would learn who truly held the keys to this home. The sound of laughter began to fade when the doorbell rang. Caroline frowned, clearly not expecting anyone else. Michael stood confused and went to answer it. I folded my napkin neatly, my heart pounding steady, because I knew exactly who stood on the other side of that door. When he walked in, briefcase in hand, expression calm and professional. Every smile around the table froze. "This won't take long," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that silences even the drunkest guest. The lawyer was here, and in a moment the truth would be too. As the lawyer placed his briefcase by the door, I could see Caroline's smile falter just slightly. She didn't yet know why he was there, but she could sense her control of the evening slipping, and that was enough to give me strength. But before I tell you what he read aloud, I need to take you back, because my story didn't begin at that Christmas table. It began decades earlier in the quiet, steady rhythm of a marriage that built everything they now took for granted. My husband Henry was not a flashy man. He worked with his hands steady and strong in construction management for over 40 years. He used to come home smelling of dust and steel, his face sunburnt, his palms calloused. I would tease him, telling him he carried half the city on his shoulders. He would laugh, kiss my cheek, and say, "Lou, every brick I place is for you and Michael." I believed him, and he was right. We didn't live extravagantly. No grand vacations, no expensive jewelry. Instead, Henry poured his life into this house, the one they now dared to call theirs. He built the wraparound porch board by board. He laid the stone fireplace with his own hands. He planted the oak tree in the backyard the year Michael was born, promising our boy would climb it someday. And when he passed away, suddenly a heart attack in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. He left me something more valuable than money. He left me security. Henry had always been meticulous with paperwork, deeds, wills, and trusts. He believed in preparing for storms, even the ones we couldn't see coming. What most people didn't know, including my own son, was that Henry had transferred the title of the house solely into my name years earlier. He did it quietly to protect me from what-ifs. What if he passed first? What if debts came due? What if Michael married someone who couldn't be trusted? Henry thought of everything. He knew people could change when property was involved, and he wasn't wrong. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. We were comfortable. We had savings, and I still worked part-time at the library. Life moved on, quiet, but content. I didn't feel wealthy, I felt safe. But safety has a way of feeling invisible to others, especially family who grow entitled. After Henry's funeral, the house became quieter, colder. Michael visited less. He married Caroline within a year, a whirlwind romance that swept him into her world of country club brunches and designer handbags. At first, I tried to welcome her. I offered recipes, asked about her family, even gifted her a quilt my mother had stitched by hand. Caroline smiled politely, but her eyes told the truth. She thought of me as something old, outdated, no longer useful. The first sign came when she redecorated. Without asking, she stripped the living room of Henry's handmade bookshelves, replacing them with sleek glass cabinets. "It's more modern this way," she said, her voice coated in honey. Michael didn't object. He never objected. Then came the subtle suggestions. "Louise, maybe it's time you thought about downsizing. It must be a lot of work to maintain this place on your own. You'd be so much happier in a retirement community, don't you think?" Every word was disguised as concern, but the message was clear. This isn't your home anymore. It's ours. I stayed quiet. For years, I swallowed my pride because I didn't want to lose my son. I told myself love was worth silence, that dignity could survive in small acts, cooking Sunday dinners, planting flowers in the garden, reading to my grandchildren when they visited. But each year, Caroline's grip tightened. She hosted parties in my dining room, inviting her friends, letting them believe it was her home. She moved my photographs off the mantel, replacing them with glossy portraits of her family. And Michael, my Michael, drifted further away. He stopped calling me Mom with warmth in his voice, stopped asking for my advice. He became a man who measured worth in money, appearances, and Caroline's approval. I told myself I could endure it. I told myself Henry's gift of security would outlast their disrespect. But then came last Christmas, the breaking point. When Caroline pointed at me and said, "We only invited her out of pity," it wasn't just cruelty, it was a declaration. She wanted everyone to see me as powerless, irrelevant, a woman clinging to scraps of belonging. But Caroline had miscalculated one thing. I wasn't powerless. I remembered Henry's voice the day he handed me the envelope with the house deed inside. "Lou, promise me something. If anyone ever makes you feel like you don't belong here, show them the papers. This is yours. Always yours." That envelope sat in a fireproof box for years, untouched. I prayed I'd never need it. But as I sat at that Christmas table, their laughter stinging my ears, I knew Henry's moment had come. So 2 weeks before Christmas, I had quietly called our family lawyer, an old friend of Henry's, someone who had watched Michael grow up. I asked him to join us that evening, to bring the documents, to read them aloud if necessary. He agreed. Sometimes the truth needs a voice stronger than silence, he told me. And so when the doorbell rang and he stepped inside, briefcase in hand, my heart wasn't nervous. It was steady. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, about reclaiming what Henry had fought to protect for me. And soon they would all know the house they laughed in, the table they mocked me at, the roof over their heads, belonged to the woman they dismissed as pity. The truth is, humiliation doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slowly, like water wearing away stone. A comment here, a dismissive look there, until one day you realize the foundation beneath you has been eroded. That's how it was with Caroline. It started small. The first Christmas after Henry died, I set the table the way he loved it. Polished silver-red napkins folded into little poinsettias, my cranberry relish in the center. Caroline swept in with her store-bought pies, her hair perfectly curled, her perfume heavy in the air. She smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Louise, how quaint." Quaint. That word followed me into the kitchen like a shadow. My son didn't notice, or maybe he pretended not to. By Easter, she had taken over hosting altogether. It's easier this way, Louise. You just sit back and relax. But sitting back meant sitting in the corner watching strangers laugh in my home while my son called Caroline's family mom and dad. Then came the vacations. One summer, I heard them planning a trip to Florida. Caroline was gushing about beachfront condos and cocktails by the water. I asked softly, "Do you need me to watch the children while you're away?" She laughed, her eyes cutting into me. "Oh no, Louise, we'll have a sitter. It's not fair to expect you to handle them at your age." At my age, I stayed behind, watering the plants, feeding their dog, and waiting for postcards that never came. When they returned, tan and glowing, Michael patted my hand like I was some kindly neighbor. "Thanks for holding down the fort, Mom." That was it. No invitation, no acknowledgement that I'd spent 2 weeks in an empty house, keeping it alive for them. But the cruelest betrayal wasn't in the vacations or the redecorating. It was in the quiet ways they began to erase Henry. The bookshelf he built with his hands gone, replaced with glossy cabinets. His old chair by the fireplace. The one with the worn armrest where he'd read bedtime stories, tossed into the garage without a word. One afternoon, I found a box by the door marked "Donation." Inside were Henry's records, his favorite jazz albums. I stood there holding them, my hands trembling while Caroline breezed past. "Oh, Louise, nobody listens to these anymore. Better someone else enjoys them." She didn't see the way my throat closed. She didn't hear Henry's voice in my head, humming those very tunes while fixing a loose cabinet. To her, they were junk. To me, they were love, memories, a life. And Michael, my son, just let it happen. It wasn't all cruelty. Sometimes Caroline coated it in sugar. "Louise, why don't you join a book club? Meet some people your own age." "Louise, maybe it's time to think about assisted living. They have activities. It would be so fun for you." "Louise, you shouldn't worry about the bills. Michael and I will take care of everything." But the tone was never concern. It was condescension. She didn't want me to have freedom. She wanted me dependent, small, grateful for scraps and my son. He nodded along, too tired, too eager to keep the peace, too blind to see what was happening. I tried to remind him. "Michael, this house is your father's legacy." He sighed. "Mom, let it go. Caroline just wants what's best." But I knew better. Caroline wanted ownership, not just of the house, but of the story. She wanted to write me out of it entirely. The breaking point came one summer evening when Caroline stood at the porch Henry built. She sipped her wine, her voice casual but sharp. "You know, Louise, one day this house will be ours. It only makes sense. Michael and I put so much into it. You'll want to leave it to us, right?" The audacity, the certainty in her voice. I remember looking at the porch rail Henry had sanded smooth at the oak tree in the yard that still bore the initials he carved with Michael, and I thought, over my dead body. From that day forward, I stopped pretending. I still smiled, still played the role of the aging widow in the corner. But inside, I began preparing. I gathered documents. I met with the lawyer Henry had trusted. I updated the trust, made sure every page was ironclad. I told no one. Because betrayal teaches you something vital. Silence is power. Let them believe you're weak, pitiful, a burden. Let them laugh. Then when the time is right, let the truth speak louder than all their cruelty combined. And so on that Christmas night, when Caroline's laughter rang in my ears, and my son's silence cut me deeper than any blade, I wasn't just an old woman at the table. I was Henry's widow, the keeper of the deed, the owner of the house they thought was theirs. And when the lawyer opened his briefcase, I knew the moment had come. The subtle betrayals were about to be replaced by a thunderclap of truth. The room stilled when he walked in. My lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, was a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm presence that made people lower their voices. He carried a slim leather briefcase, nothing ostentatious, but in that moment, it may as well have been a sword. Caroline blinked rapidly, her smile flickering as though she couldn't decide whether to greet him or sneer. "Oh, Michael, did you invite someone else?" My son frowned, his brows knitting together. "No, I didn't." Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat gently, his voice carrying across the room. "Apologies for the interruption, but I was asked to stop by tonight. Mrs. Harrington." I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my untouched plate. My heart was calm. I had lived for this moment, prepared for it. "Yes," I said softly. "Please go ahead." Caroline's eyes darted between us, suspicion blooming across her face. "What is this about?" Mr. Whitaker set the briefcase on the sideboard, unlatched it with a click, and withdrew a stack of papers. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the room full of smug faces. "I've been asked to read aloud a legal declaration concerning the ownership of this residence." The chatter died instantly. Forks paused midair. Even the children sensed the weight in his tone. Caroline let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, surely this isn't necessary," Mr. Whitaker continued, unbothered. His voice was steady, professional, unyielding. "This house, located at 214 Oakage Lane, is by deed and trust the sole property of Mrs. Louise Harrington. Title was transferred to her name over 15 years ago by her late husband, Henry Harrington. As of today, she remains the full legal owner." A silence followed so deep I could hear the fire crackle in the hearth. Michael blinked. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the china. "Wait, what?" Caroline's parents stiffened in their chairs, Lorraine's manicured hand flying to her pearls. George cleared his throat, but no words came out. And Caroline, "Oh, Caroline!" She leaned forward, her face flushing, her voice sharp. "That can't be right. Michael and I have been living here for years. We've paid for renovations for furniture." Mr. Whitaker didn't flinch. "Madam, improvements and decor do not override legal ownership. The deed is indisputable. Every room you occupy, every wall under this roof belongs to Mrs. Harrington." I watched as the words landed like heavy stones, one after another, crushing the smugness right out of their faces. Caroline's voice cracked, shrill. "Michael, say something." But Michael just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a man who's just realized the ground beneath him isn't solid after all. "Mom, you never told me." I met his gaze evenly. "No, Michael, I didn't because it wasn't necessary." Until tonight, Caroline's laughter rang out suddenly, brittle and desperate. "This is ridiculous. You mean to tell me we've been treating her like family out of pity, when really she's been hiding this? She's been deceiving us." I finally spoke, my voice low but cutting. "No, Caroline, the only deception here is the one you've been living. Thinking this house, my husband's legacy, was ever yours to claim." The lawyer cleared his throat again, lifting another page. "Furthermore, the trust stipulates that Mrs. Harrington reserves the right to determine residency at her discretion, which means she may allow or disallow occupancy as she sees fit." Caroline's face went pale. "You mean she could evict?" I finished calmly. "Yes." Gasps fluttered around the table like startled birds. For the first time in years, I saw Caroline speechless. She sank back into her chair, her hands gripping the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles whitened. I turned to the room, my eyes sweeping across every face that had laughed at me minutes earlier. "You all sat here and laughed when she said I was only invited out of pity. You thought I was powerless, invisible, just an old woman you could dismiss. But this house, every stone, every brick, every memory, belongs to me. And Henry made sure it would stay that way." The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of shame. No one dared meet my eyes. Michael finally whispered almost to himself, "All this time, it was yours?" "Yes," I said softly, my voice steady, always mine. Caroline tried one last gasp at control, her words trembling. Well, if you own it, then surely you wouldn't throw us out at Christmas. You wouldn't embarrass your son that way." I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had tossed my husband's chair, who had called my food quaint, who had mocked me in my own dining room. And then I smiled, not coy, but with the kind of quiet power Caroline would never understand. "Embarrass you? Caroline, You did that all on your own? The lawyer snapped his briefcase shut, his work complete. He gave me a small nod, the kind a soldier gives a general after a battle well fought. The room sat frozen in stunned silence, plates untouched, wine glasses trembling in hands that no longer felt steady. I folded my hands in my lap once more, but this time it wasn't out of habit. It was out of victory, because in that moment, I wasn't the woman invited out of pity. I was the woman who owned the house, and they all knew it. The air in the dining room felt different now, heavy. No one reached for the turkey or the wine. The laughter that had stung me moments earlier had dissolved into stunned silence, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Michael was the first to move. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor, and stood with both hands pressed against the table. His face was pale, his voice low. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him, my only son, the boy Henry and I had raised in this very house. "Because it wasn't something you needed to know, Michael. Your father left this home to me to protect me. It wasn't about keeping secrets, it was about safety." Caroline scoffed, her brittle laugh slicing through the silence. "Safety number. This was about control. You hid this from your son. You let us live here under the illusion that it was ours, when all along you were just waiting for a moment to humiliate us." Her voice shook, not from sorrow, but from rage. Mr. Whitaker remained calm, sliding the signed deed across the table like a final nail in her coffin. "There's no illusion, Mrs. Harrington. The legal owner is clear, and occupancy is at her discretion." Caroline's eyes darted from him to me, sharp and venomous, at her discretion. "So she could just kick us out after everything we've done for this place." I felt something shift in me. Years of quiet suffering, years of being called quaint, of being erased in my own home, and yet I didn't raise my voice. My strength was in my steadiness. "Yes, Caroline," I said. "I could, and I will." Her jaw dropped, words stuttering out like broken glass. You can't be serious." Michael spun to me, his voice strained. "Mom, please." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Michael, for years I have endured your wife's disrespect. I have been mocked, ignored, and treated like a burden in the very home your father built for us. Tonight." She stood at my table, surrounded by my family, and told everyone I was invited out of pity. "Do you think Henry would want me to let that pass?" His eyes wavered, torn between blood and marriage, between the woman who raised him and the woman he had chosen. He didn't answer, and in his silence, Caroline filled the gap. "You're doing this to punish me," she spat. "To punish us? But you'll regret it, Louise. You'll end up alone in this big empty house, and when you're gone, guess who it all goes to?" Her words were meant to cut, but they only revealed her greed. I leaned forward, my voice steady as stone. "Caroline, you assumed too much. Do you think Henry and I didn't prepare for this? Do you think I haven't already spoken with Mr. Whitaker about where this house goes when I pass?" A flicker of doubt crossed her face. I smiled, soft but sharp. "Let me be clear. You will never inherit this home. Not one brick, not one board. Henry made sure of it, and I finalized it. So if you're waiting for me to die, Caroline, you'll be waiting for nothing." Lorraine gasped, clutching her pearls tighter. George muttered something about unfair under his breath, but his eyes stayed fixed on the deed. Caroline's fury boiled over. She stood so abruptly her chair toppled backward. "You old witch! You've poisoned Michael against me from the start. You think you're so clever with your papers and your smug little secrets, but you can't just erase me." I stood too, slow and deliberate, my hands resting lightly on the table. "I don't need to erase you, Caroline. You've erased yourself. Tonight, in front of everyone you tried to impress, you showed exactly who you are. Cruel, greedy, and blind to the truth." The lawyer's voice cut through the tension like a gavel. "Mrs. Harrington has full legal authority to remove you from the premises if she so chooses. I suggest you moderate your tone." Caroline's face flushed crimson, but she said nothing more. Michael's voice cracked softer now, pleading, "Mom, what are you saying? That we have to leave?" I turned to him, my heart aching, even as my resolve held firm. "Yes, Michael, I've already spoken with Mr. Whitaker. You and Caroline will have 30 days to find another place. Consider this Christmas dinner your notice." The room erupted with murmurs. Caroline's cousins exchanged wide-eyed looks. Lorraine sputtered. George pushed back from the table, muttering about disgrace. But Michael just stared at me, his eyes wet, his lips trembling. "You do this to your own son?" I stepped closer, my voice softening but not breaking. No, Michael, I'm doing this for my son, because somewhere along the way, you forgot who you are. You let yourself believe your worth was tied to her approval, to this illusion of control. Maybe losing what you never truly owned will remind you of what really matters. Caroline stormed from the room, her heels clicking like gunfire against the hardwood. The front door slammed so hard the garland rattled from the frame. The rest of the table sat in stunned silence. I straightened my back, smoothed the front of my dress, and looked around at the faces that had mocked me only an hour earlier. This is still Christmas, and in this house we will finish our meal in peace. Those who wish to leave may do so. Those who stay will remember whose table they sit at. No one moved. For the first time in years, I felt Henry's presence at my side, steady and proud. And for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. The days after Christmas were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The house, my house, felt heavy with the echo of slammed doors and unfinished arguments. I found Caroline's wineglass still sitting on the mantel the next morning, lipstick stain dried against the rim like a mark of defiance. I washed it slowly, letting the water run hot over my hands as if cleansing the air of her presence. Michael stayed away for a few days. His calls didn't come. His car didn't pull into the driveway. The silence between us stretched. And though it hurt, I didn't chase him. I'd learned long ago that chasing love only made it run faster. Instead, I busied myself with the house. I took down the Christmas tree, boxed the ornaments one by one, each holding a memory. Michael's paper snowflake from 3rd grade, Henry's favorite brass bell, my mother's glass angel. For years, Caroline had scoffed at these outdated decorations, replacing them with glittering sets she ordered in bulk. But now with her gone, the tree looked like it used to. Imperfect, personal, real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. But peace is fragile when you're dealing with people like Caroline. On the 5th day, Michael finally returned. He came alone, his shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He didn't knock, just walked in like he always had. He found me in the kitchen kneading dough the way my mother taught me. "Mom," he whispered, as though the word itself carried shame. I wiped my hands on my apron and faced him. He looked older somehow, stripped of the confidence Caroline had draped over him like a borrowed coat. "She's furious," he admitted. "She says you've humiliated her, says she won't live under a roof where she's treated like a guest." I raised an eyebrow. "Then she's free to leave because that's exactly what she is, a guest. One who overstayed her welcome." He flinched at my words. "Mom, don't do this. Don't make me choose between you and her." "Michael," I said, my voice steady, "you already chose. Every time you stayed silent while she mocked me. Every time you let her erase your father from this house, you chose, son. You just didn't realize it." His eyes filled, his voice breaking. I didn't want to lose her. I softened, my heart aching even as I held my ground. "And in keeping her, you almost lost me." The words hung there, raw and unpolished. He sat heavily at the table, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, I saw the boy again. Not the man Caroline molded, but the boy who used to climb the oak tree with scraped knees, who used to beg for one more bedtime story from his father. And I realized then he wasn't cruel, not truly. He was weak, and weakness can be remedied, but only if it's faced. Caroline, however, had no such reckoning. Word traveled quickly through the family grapevine. Cousins whispered, neighbors asked questions. By New Year's Eve, Caroline's humiliation had spread beyond the dinner table. People knew she had mocked me, only to discover I owned the very house she bragged about. Lorraine called me one afternoon, her voice clipped and sharp. "Louise, surely you don't intend to go through with this eviction nonsense? It would ruin Michael. Think of your reputation." I smiled to myself. "My reputation survived your daughter's laughter. It will survive just fine without her approval." She sputtered, but I hung up before she could say more. The eviction papers were filed in early January, 30 days, clear and legal. Caroline tried to contest them, threatening lawyers. But the trust was ironclad. Henry had seen to that. By mid-Mon, boxes lined the hallway outside their bedroom. My bedroom once, when Henry was alive. I watched them pack from the doorway, not with bitterness, but with a quiet certainty. Caroline muttered under her breath, venom dripping with each word. Michael avoided my eyes. On the final morning, she turned to me, her face twisted with anger. "Enjoy your empty house, Louise, because when you're gone, there'll be no one left to care about you." I met her glare evenly. Better to live alone in dignity than surrounded by people who laugh at you. She had no reply. They left before noon, the door slamming shut behind them. The sound was loud, final, and strangely liberating. That night, I sat by the fire in Henry's chair, the very one Caroline once tried to throw out. I poured myself a glass of wine, not to toast victory, but to honor survival. For years I had been silent, shrinking in corners, letting them paint me as irrelevant. But Henry's gift, his foresight, had given me one final chance to stand, and I had. Did it hurt to watch my son walk away with her? Yes. Did it break me to know our bond had cracked so deeply? Of course. But sometimes justice isn't gentle. Sometimes it demands sacrifice. I whispered into the flames as though Henry was sitting beside me. I kept my promise. Love, no one took this house from us, not while I had breath. And in that moment, the silence wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. Weeks passed. The house felt different, lighter, freer, as though it had been holding its breath for years, and finally exhaled. I filled the silence with small joys. I baked bread on Sundays. I read by the fire in Henry's chair, and I planted new bulbs in the garden, already imagining them blooming come spring. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next insult. The house was mine again, not just by deed, but by spirit. Michael didn't come around at first. Pride can be a heavy wall to climb, but one afternoon, as the snow melted into slush, I heard a knock at the door. He stood there alone. No Caroline, no smug entourage, just my son, tired, thinner, his eyes carrying the weight of choices that had crumbled around him. "Mom," he said softly. "I'm sorry." I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his hands the way Henry used to when words failed him. Slowly, haltingly, he admitted what I already knew. Caroline had left him. She'd packed her things, furious at being robbed of her future, and walked out. For the first time in years, I saw clarity in his eyes. Not the boy I'd raised, not yet, but a man beginning to shed the illusions that had blinded him. "I should have defended you," he whispered. "All those times she mocked you." I stayed silent. I let her disrespect Dad's memory. This house, you. And I can't take it back. My heart ached. Forgiveness isn't simple. It's layered, messy. But he was my son. And seeing him there broken reminded me that justice had never been about vengeance. It was about truth. "You lost your way, Michael," I said gently. "But you can find it again. Just remember this. Respect is worth more than any house, any money, any pride. Don't forget it again." As the weeks turned into months, we began to mend slowly, carefully. He came by on Sundays to help me with the garden, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes talking about Henry. There was no grand reconciliation, no perfect ending, but there was progress, and that was enough. To those of you listening, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe someone made you feel small, invisible, unwanted. I know that sting. I know what it feels like to sit at a table and hear laughter aimed like knives. But let me tell you something. Your worth is not defined by their words. Sometimes silence and patience are your greatest allies. And sometimes the truth, when it's finally spoken, can silence an entire room. So never let anyone laugh at your value. Never let them write you out of your own story. This is Louise Harrington, and that was my Christmas dinner. The night pity turned to power, and the night I remembered Henry's promise. This house will always be yours. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Has your family ever underestimated you? Share it below because your story matters.